So today we come to, I'm going to kill this thing, honestly. There we go. We come to the third and final talk in the first meme of the course on creating. And we're really going to look at mods in as more than a case study, as probably the apotheosis of the issue of creating in relation to video games. And next week, we move on to kind of the second meme of the course, which is connecting. And that really ends up being around contract law. And what contract law does to what we call intellectual property law. So today we kind of finish opening up things in terms of rights, and next week we start the investigation of what rights remain and how are they channeled once the contract lawyers are through with you. So where we were last week was talking about the freedom to create. Where is it? Can we find it? And then there was a big question. I considered a big question, and I didn't feel that I answered it at all well, although with retrospect, I didn't answer it incorrectly. So this is the slide that triggered the question. And more particularly, this is the line that triggered the question. What is perhaps most interesting about moral rights is that it is the only, I did put it in round brackets, legal concept that assumes creativity, and I did put in a question mark. This is your teacher becoming defensive, saying, I wasn't completely wrong. And the question was a very simple and direct and quite wonderful one. Well, doesn't copyright law, like all of copyright law, assume creativity? So let's look at the act. Your lawyers to be. You need to spend some time with this language. We're not going to be able to do it all here, but look at, artistic work includes certain things: paintings, drawings, photographs, works of artistic craftsmanship, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So this is from the definitions section. And what I want you to look at is that this describes outputs. Creativity is an input. And that's semantic. So you can say, well, these are creative outputs, and then there are inputs to creativity. So you're always going to get into, we're lawyers, we're going to get into dynamic semantic issues. But I'll go a little bit further. If you look at the Copyright Act, it's hard to argue that it isn't based on the commodification rather than the creativity. And if you look at the policy statements around copyright, that's where you find encouraging creativity, and this is why we're doing it. But the act itself is relatively devoid of that language. And the act itself enables a commercial liquidity. I mean, you read it objectively and see what you think. I may be wrong about this, but this is about what you think, not what I think. This is me as a cheap shot artist. When you do a search on the government website of the act, and you plug in the word creative and you plug in the word creativity, you get a null set return. Those words are not used in the Copyright Act. Now, if you Google government websites, there's a place where you can do all government websites, and you put in the word creativity, you get policy documents, hundreds of them, in the context of copyright about creativity.
I'm just wondering, is creative works in there, or creative any derivative?
No. Well, I mean, by all means, do it yourself. I'd say 70% wrong last week in answering the question. So, I could easily be wrong again. I put in creativity and I put in creative. So, all that said, here's what next year's slide will look like. What is perhaps most interesting about moral rights is that it is the only legal concept which directly incorporates the process of creativity. You cannot, moral rights comes from and is completely identified with the creator's process of creating. Copyright is the result of a creation, but it is often and easily divorced from the creator, and therefore not as directly identified with the creative process. Fine distinction. I think in many ways, for the purposes of what we have to go through today, it's actually a really important one. And I'm very grateful for the question, and hopefully I've at least given you a broader flavor. I think it's a really important question. And I think it goes to, I actually think when you spend a little time reading this, you go, wow, that is just not where we are in the digital world around the process of what should be. This needs to be updated to reflect how we really make things. It does seem dated. Now, what it should be, that's, there's a lot of complication in that. So today we're in remixing in games, which is mods, and we're going to go through a lot of stuff quickly. So this is a paper by Greg Listowka, who I'll come back to. On paper, this is an article. Just to give you the flavor, Greg is a professor of law at Rutgers, does a lot of stuff around video games, which we'll come to. But games implicate and challenge the future of copyright. And especially games where the user, the gamer, is creating. We've talked about that a lot and why that would be a lot. Sometimes the reason I love this course so much is because, this is from today. So this is a mod for Sims 4. Again, this fits into papers you might want to write, but here you've got a mod that adds certain things to the game. This is so rich on so many levels. Think of the intellectual property issues. Think of it from the perspective of EA Maxis. Think about it in terms of the right of the modder. Think about it in terms of the magic circle and that this is all fantasy. Think of it in terms of this mod is available to 12-year-olds. It's kind of all here. maybe in some future iteration of the course, I would just sort of take this and say we're going to do an entire course on this one headline and one article. Modding has a relationship. So when I started teaching this course, the analogy would be remix culture, what I guess I now think of as hip hop, but rap remix culture was, modding was the video game version, the analogy in other creative spheres. Well, it's become fan fiction. If you're looking for kind of the broader place, and it's actually very broad and very deep, where the issues around modding exist but not in video games, fan fiction. If you're writing a paper in the area, there's a bunch of learned academic articles on fan fiction you should be looking at. Same thing, but not as digital. This is from Greg Listowka. This is important because there's not that much, there's a lot of non-legal video game academic research out there. There's not that much legal academic research out there. So this is something called the Player Authors Project about user-generated content in video games. Greg did last year, and there's a ton of infographics. If you're doing a paper in the area, you need to pull this up. Obviously, the link is there. But fascinating stuff. The majority of video game players create and enjoy user-generated content. That's a really big number. That's huge. Oh, these different slides, they just look similar? No? I have it in there twice, sorry. Most user-generated content was original and not referential. I just put in the things that surprised me. So most user-generated content, not what we would call derivative, more on that later, but was original content based essentially on built on the technical platform of the video game. Now, there's another slide which I didn't include. I'll come to your question in a second. If you're deep into this area, where Greg does show that the most popular mods often include more referential material, more derivative material.
Sorry, so the biggest slide was most of them create and enjoy, but only half share online. So the implication is that even within the majority that do create, a lot of it
for personal consumption, yeah. And where that becomes relevant is today I'm going to show you what new amendments to our Copyright Act say around personal consumption and the exemptions that are created there. So it's actually very relevant. And at least in Canada, I'd say we're at the forefront of the world right now. It's addressed. So contextualizing before we dive in, I want to bring the themes a little bit together. You know them all because we've been talking about them. So what is a video game? And what role does interactivity play? There's one really interesting piece, and I know this is a little bit again. It's like the reference to fan fiction. We're going outside to look back inside, but not as outside as you think. Douglas Rushkoff, who's a pretty thoughtful and very smart commentator, did a piece about his belief that you can prototype democracy through gamification, if you will, and that it's a useful tool that taking the elements of video games and applying them to broader problems like democracy itself is a fruitful area of inquiry. And I just want to point out, so there's a quote here from him. By viewing our social, political, and economic structures through the lens of interactivity, Rushkoff says, we are beginning to transition from the world of passively accepted narrative to one that invites our ongoing participation. I just want to focus you for a second that this is the core gaming mechanic. It's the social interaction part that we've been talking about. So I found that picture of McLuhan irresistible. It's just a fantastic sort of academic, out of place picture on the open net. So back to McLuhan. Why do we game? Social reaction. I've thrown in the quote. We're not going to go through it, but I wanted you at least to have the quote again because I keep referring to it, and I only put it up there in the first class. And then I want you to look at this. This is back to Boyden, but maybe in with a slightly different graphic. The word video game. Game is not IP. Video is. So you have to, it's this really interesting dance that we're always playing around the IP part until we get to contract next week, where the rules of the game get scrambled. But here's your simple visualization. The word is video game. The video part is clearly IP. The game part is clearly not IP. Why? Because of the role of the gamer who populates and makes the game live, and without whom the game cannot exist. So we have all those dependencies leading into mods, where the gamer is building the mod. So the question is fully joined. This is, you guys keep hearing about Grand Prix Legends. This is the Grand Prix Legends GPL 65 mod. It's a fabulous mod. So the starting point, there's a bunch of things we now have to go through. Because if you want to establish a right to mod, you have to tear down and rebuild up copyright law. And so the rest of this is fairly legalistic. But this first part starts with the legal and then actually becomes sociological. The idea-expression dichotomy is core idea in intellectual property. It is the very simple and true statement of intellectual property law that there is no intellectual property in an idea. It's the fixation of the idea until the act of copying, until the act of tangibility. An idea itself cannot be copyrighted. So until it's put down on paper or it's in your device, Sorry, I'm going to walk over here because I need a prop. It's actually important for the rest of this talk. Until it's in your device, got nothing. So I was talking to a couple of students about their papers before class. Somebody overheard that conversation and decided they wanted to write the same paper on the same ideas. They could. No problem. It's not fair, it's not right, but somebody's a couple of people have put some real effort into thinking about what they want to write about. In an open setting, they talked to me about it. There were other people in the room. Boom. Somebody else in the room could write the exact same paper on the exact same theme, take all the ideas that we talked about, and we talked about quite a few, and there may be some interesting ethical issues, but there are no legal ones. Now, somebody else hacked the students' notes. Now you got real issues because there's copyright in the notes. This thing's going to kill me. It's been going on for 3 years. I'm going the wrong way. All right. So, what would have happened 70 years ago? In a classroom, I found a classroom 70 years ago. Yes, there were some people taking notes. There were no computers. And mostly you'll see people aren't keeping notes. They're listening. No one's recording it. Right? This is all recorded. This is all up on the website. Now, what we call fixation, the technical term for how things move from idea to expression, that happens at the speed of this, or at the speed of your computer. The result is profound. A long time ago, you had a relative balance. Ideas were private for a longer time, and then at some point they became public expression. Today, the world looks like this. Ideas have a very short half-life, and everything is expressed. I mean, clearly, we express way too much. And things live in private for a very short time, and they live on Facebook for a very long time. Now, Snapchat tries to address that. There are certain pushbacks here and there. Increasing stress on privacy will address parts of this. But largely speaking, this is what the world looks like today. So, this has gone out of whack. That nice, how things might have looked 70 years ago in a slower time with less technology and no digital. We're out of whack. So, my thesis here, what you can push back on, is you have a lot of people, especially non-lawyers, saying that the law has failed the digital age. And I'm not as sure that it's a failure of law, because the idea-expression dichotomy is a good one. It makes sense. Certainly not a failure of technology. It's a result of the progress of technology. If we were to create a new concept, I don't know if we would want to drop the idea-expression dichotomy. So we need to rebalance it. That's a simple thought. How do we do that? We acknowledge in some form a right to create. I'm not on a mission to make those words the words. And you'll see we've made, at least in Canada, incredible progress in this area compared to the rest of the world. Thanks to the Supreme Court of Canada, thanks to amendments to the Copyright Act, which I'll take you through. But whereas when I wrote the first book on video game law in 2005 and gave my first talks on it, I wanted to argue for a right to mod, and I couldn't intellectually, honestly say that there was one. We're a lot closer to it now. I can't definitively, and I won't today definitively tell you that there is, but I'm going to take you, I think, a fair bit down the road. And we've had some interesting help, like the right to hyperlink. Canada was the first to acknowledge a right to hyperlink. In Crooks versus Newton, 2011 Supreme Court of Canada. There have been other jurisdictions that didn't recognize it. Today, virtually everyone does. The world has moved to that standard. Canada was first. We're world leaders in this area, which is fascinating. And kudos to the Supreme Court of Canada, because they really did it. Okay. So we're back to a little trick here. I've added the word mod in front of create. They're actually synonymous. Reflect on how does your personal creativity impact in an interactive environment. That's what we're talking about. There's nothing particularly interesting there. Now, here's an interesting bit of pushback. And this paper is going to play a very prominent role in the second semester course on legal constraints on digital creativity. But it bears mentioning here because it impacts our mod discussion. It's not a paper about video games, and that's why I'm reluctant to spend too much time on it. It's a paper that's forthcoming in the Harvard Law Review by Joseph Fishman. It's coming out in 2015. The link to the pre-publication version is there. And the basic thesis is that obstacles to creativity, challenges to creativity, have a counterintuitive positive impact on creativity. That when you put a challenge or an obstacle or a constraint in front of a creator, they overcome that and do something more creative as a result. You can really question that thesis, but that's the thesis. That's the argument. And the thesis is, therefore, copyright law as a constraint on creativity is good. Not bad. Doesn't need to be loosened up, because we're actually doing the creators a favor by putting obstacles in their way.
Well, I would say that the popularity of video games shows that you were perfectly capable of coming up with their own obstacles.
I think my essential argument, I have, as you would imagine, pages of notes, and I will write a very long blog post on this, but you've put your finger on the core objection. the core objection is let's ask our guest in the second hour today. Not have you overcome obstacles and come to a better place, because Ian will tell you, yes, I have. Every creator will tell you that. But do you need more obstacles to creativity? And he will say, no, thanks. I already have plenty. I don't actually need any more. And any of you can test that thesis simply by working through your own technology and your own frustrations as you're trying to make something, as you're trying to write a paper for this course. You need more things to overcome? So this is, this needs to be looked at on multiple levels, including the psychological, the testing. But it does cite research. If you're interested in this area, it's wonderfully challenging. I'd like to know a little bit more about the author in terms of, has he worked in a television station? Has he worked in a video game company? Has he created stuff outside of law? Does he know what that feels like?
It also strikes me as being sort of the opposite of the fashion video.
Yes.
That we watch, by having everything really available and more creative.
It's exactly the opposite. And last week there was here at the law school, professor from Southern California named Orly Lobel. Did anybody come see her speak? So she gave a wonderful talk, and I'll link to her paper because that was the counterpoint to this, but where she talked about the limits on human mobility, so employment mobility, among creators and in the tech industries and impliedly in the video game industries as well. And how restrictive covenants, which are illegal in California and legal in Massachusetts, this is just part of her talk, may be responsible for the fact that Silicon Valley thrived and an equally potential-laden area, which is the MIT corridor outside of Boston, has not thrived nearly as much. So, but this is fascinating stuff, and fascinating stuff academically. And it's very much worth asking the question. So now let's just quickly go through. How do you establish the right to mod? This is a true statement. So when I look for the core of the anti-mod sentiment, at least from a video game industry perspective, I come up with this. And this is from a developer. We believe it is our duty to uphold the integrity of our work. That's why we're going after the modders. And this was a statement by the general manager of Tecmo in reaction against online foreign members who released mod skins, nude mod skins, I might add, for Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball. Has anybody ever, well, no one's going to admit they've played Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball. Well, those of you who are gamers, imagine what Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball is, and would you put integrity of our work in the same sentence as Dead or Alive Extreme Beach Volleyball? So it's get right into the double standard of this stuff. Now, if you want to establish a right to mod, you're going to have to overcome cases. And the first case is MicroStar and FormGen. MicroStar, so this had to do with the game Duke Nukem. And the community created a bunch of levels for Duke Nukem for free, made it available on community forums. The end-user license agreement from the developer of Duke Nukem allowed for the community to make these mods. And a company called MicroStar collected these mods off of the free net without the permission of the makers of the mods and without compensating them. Put those 300 mods on a CD-ROM disk and sold the CD-ROM disk commercially. What's wrong with this picture? The court obviously wasn't having any of this, but this becomes a precedent against mods in a certain sense. But not really, because actually it's protecting the modders on a certain level as well. And when the developer sued MicroStar, the developer won. Davidson and Associates, an internet gateway. Rock talked about this case at some length last week. This was the reverse engineering of the multiplayer BattleNet software that Blizzard had put out there. Davidson and Associates is actually the corporate name of Blizzard, or was at the time of this litigation. Blizzard succeeded based on the end-user license agreement that prohibited reverse engineering. We'll come back to, so I'm just kind of throwing out all the cases that look like mods. One case that kind of goes the other way, again, we talked about last week, Louis Galoob Toys and Nintendo of America in 1992. That was the Game Genie case. And you'll remember the Game Genie didn't actually affect the code of the game, didn't actually affect any of the copyright material, and the court allowed it. I'm just doing a quick survey. iRacing and Robinson, this is probably the most problematic case. It's a lower court decision, and Modder used the NASCAR 2003 executable. And you got to know that NASCAR 2003, I talked about Grand Prix Legends, and we're actually talking about the same developer. So the developer that was actually very community friendly, and I think is actually very community friendly, around Grand Prix Legends. If you kind of read and parse the case, which is unreported, I've made it available in a certain way because it is on the net, but it is not a reported case per se. The lawyer that won the case put it up on their own website. So that's why you can actually read the case. The developer seemed to feel that the modder was acting well beyond the pale. They were modifying the executable of the game. They weren't just building art assets and doing other things. They were going right to the core code, and that core code was going to be used in a game called iRacing, which I've already confessed to you I play. But this is, no way around it. This is a straight-out mod case. The modder put out a racing series, but went right into the heart of the engine. And iRacing won. But on contract. Breach of contract, but not. But it was a fair use. So it was okay to mod, except the contract said it wasn't. You now have a glimpse of the next 3 weeks of the course. And then MDY, this is the bot glider case. Similar result. The players were not copyright infringing. But there was contractual breaches. So what are the common denominators here? Because if we're going to try and argue for a right to mod, how far can we go? Creativity never comes up in these cases. And I'll show you later in the course, in fact, how crazy afraid, especially in the Davidson case, Blizzard's lawyers were that somebody might raise that this was a free speech issue. They did everything they could to characterize it as purely technical. There's nothing creative. There's nothing imaginative. This was just reverse engineering, cut and paste, a bunch of technical stuff. And you got to remember that in the Blizzard case, we're actually talking not about a mod. We're talking about a technical piece of software that allowed multiplayer. And you'll hear the voice of the lawyer because I'll play the audio to you, where he's practically pleading to the court, no, there's no creativity. This is not about creativity. This is about that other stuff. It's really important. Copyright only is directly relevant in MicroStar and Galoob. So when you have copyright-only cases, I think MicroStar, which is the Duke Nukem case, is probably distinguishable. It's such an odd set of facts. You really can interpret it quite rightly as a protection of the modders. The company, MicroStar, was not doing any mods. They were aggregating other people's mods. They didn't do anything creative. And the Game Genie case actually is mod favorable or mod sensitive. And then you go to the other cases, and fair use is acknowledged. This would be a fair use, except for the contractual terms. That's Davidson, iRacing, MDY. So this is where we are. This is an analysis that shows you, I think, that as far as copyright law is concerned, with some reasonable precautions, modding can be defended. This is my caveat. Anybody know what's in the background here? 3D printer. That's the far country, right? That's where we're going. But it doesn't mean mods are fair use. But I'm suggesting we're almost there. And what's at stake? Mods, machinima, fan fiction, remix culture, 3D printing. We've already talked about this. So this is right to create versus creator's right. We've talked about it last week. We talked about it again in the context of the question that I was asked last week at the beginning of this class. But the distinction is that a right to create is a personal right that has to do with creativity. The creator's right, which is what we actually have in the Copyright Act, attaches to the content post facto. It assumes that something creative must have happened in some black hole, but it's a commercial right that's layered on top and comes into existence ex nihilo, right? It starts. You know there was a prequel, but it assumes the work exists. In your brain, in our brains, we go, well, the work, we can imply that the work had to have some creativity to it, and the law actually demands some minimal standards of creativity to it. But the narrative structure of the Copyright Act sort of starts you before the prequel. Except, again, I'll lead you back to moral rights. So, another way of saying it, you've already seen this slide, asking the question in a different way, what's more important to you, creativity or property? What do you think should rule? So I'm really nasty either or, sorry. A couple of things. What are the cores of the creative? You can sort of read this on your own time, but I'm going to just go to Rushdie's quote. To be creative, you can't be chilled. If you are afraid of the consequences of your creativity, if you're afraid of the constraints, then you won't be creative. Exactly the opposite of the Fishman article that says, embrace the constraints because they'll make you more creative. Law professor or writer, you choose. But it is a very worthwhile debate. Long list of intellectual property paradoxes. Is intellectual property intellectual? Is it property? We can go through a litany. You can read these. You can read these on your own. But there's so much laden in the words intellectual property. And again, do a search of the Copyright Act and look for the words intellectual property. It's not there. Intellectual property is a label. It's really fascinating. One of your property law profs said to me, you know, we've incorporated intellectual property in first-year property law. That's a huge political act. It's a subset because, now, is it really property? So, you know, the intellectual part, well, is actually undermined by the tangibility that's required by copyright. Property? It's designed to be impermanent. Right? It's built right into the act that it's limited, that it's for the public benefit. It's more like a leaseback. It belongs to the public, but we're letting the creator have certain rights over it for a certain period of time. Property? Anyways. Just, you know, the original copyright statute in England, Statute of Anne, 1710, an act for the encouragement of learning. Let's remember where the purposes were. Now, all of this ends up being, what do we really mean? What do we really want copyright to be? Should it just return to what it once was in 1710 about copying? The technology now allows for a lot more than copying. remixing was not really much thought of in 1710. So, again, we can assume that when I put up a statute, when I put up the Copyright Act in this context, it's for you to read it on your own time and go, oh, that wording is awkward. So derivative rights in the digital age, the creator gets the sole right. The creator's not used. Do you see how it works? I'm just using the word creator. The sole right to produce or reproduce the work or any substantial part thereof in any material form, whatever. Not horrible. It's actually better than the section I previously showed you. But U.S. Act's better, more clear. Derivative work, actually calls it a derivative work, is a work based upon one or more pre-existing works. So now, this is a piece of research that you can attack because it's mine and I have no real antecedent for it, but I just want to point something out to you. You need to look at where copyright came from. Originally, censorship belonged to the king, and the king created the Star Chamber, which was abolished in 1641, delegated the right to censorship to Parliament. Parliament then delegated it to the licensing guild of those that had printing presses. And I took you through a little bit of Areopagitica by John Milton last week. He argued against the licensing of printing presses and a regulatory body to over a CRTC for printing presses. And lost. And eventually, in 1710, the publishers got the right of controlling their own material and to censor or not censor their own material. How? Through the Statute of Anne. The copyright, the original copyright legislation can be understood in a larger context as part of the democratization of thought. Copyright can be understood as non-censorship. There's a legitimate interpretation of that, in my view. Now look at the right to mod from that, with that little arrow in your quiver. This is just the transition then, and the question that we've alluded to and we've talked about is, where did copyright go from a creator's right over their own content and really to prevent censorship of their own content to a property right and a commercial right and the inclusion of copyright law in first-year property law? It's a fascinating political question. This is just, as we move forward into next week, I want you to think about tattoos. Why tattoos? Because when you make a game like UFC, as you heard from Brian Dartnell of EA, the tattoos of the UFC fighters are a prominent part of the game. what do you do about the tattoo artist and the role of the tattoo artist, whose work ends up in the game? So parsing that out and thinking about this actually will help you think about mods as well. How do you go forward? I've told you we're almost there. What are the possible means of going forward? This is going to go through this very, very quickly. So number one way, talked about Sony and Universal, you take time shifting and you make it context shifting. You say the modder is simply shifting the context of the digital bits. It's more than time shifting, but you could rationalize a structure that allows for mods, at least intellectually through that argument. Remember, the key factors at Sony were that what was being done actually enlarged the broadcast audience and did not impair the copyright value. And you can make the same argument for 99% of mods. The iRacing and Robinson case is the exception, in fact. Users' rights in Canada. So the Supreme Court of Canada has given us actually a framework within which you could actually straight out argue for the right to mod. Straight out. Take those 5 cases. You'll find enough resonances. I've put them there. Add Crooks and Newton in because it wasn't one of the 5 cases. Add Law Society of Upper Canada case in there. You're good to go. The key finding is that when you look at fair dealing in Canada, the key finding in the entire pentology to me is that Madam Justice Abella said you're looking at it from the perspective not of the copyright holder, but of the user. That's why it's called users' rights. So the definitional element of what you're allowed to do rests not with the game developer, but with the game player. Think of, in the context of our first 4 weeks of talking, how profound that is. How profoundly forward-thinking that is. And then this is just the amendment 2921, non-commercial user-generated content. This relates to the question earlier in the class. Non-commercial, go crazy. 50%, according to Greg Listowka of Rutgers, 50% or mods are just used by the person who makes them. Absolutely zero consequence. No practical consequence, I don't think, anywhere, but absolutely no consequence in Canada. Counterintuitive argument comes from a British paper, very good British paper, says, you know what? We should go the other way. We should raise the thresholds for IP protection. Should make it harder to get IP protection. And that will allow for easier relations in terms of borrowing other people's content, because most of it will fall below the threshold. It's an interesting approach. It's an excellent paper. These are just ideas to think about. 2 more. These are more mine. What if we just set it up as a barter system? We're all creators in the modern world. Am I really stealing your stuff if you're taking mine? Didn't Bob Dylan actually use lots and lots of stuff? Well, I'm not going to pick on Bob Dylan. Bands that have sued for copyright infringement of their songs. Do you really believe that they never had borrowed any riffs or influences from anywhere else? And there's a bunch of articles you can find that sort of unmask the double standard. And then this is sort of my really crazy idea. I'd like to see the technology get to the point where we all have an algorithm, a sharing algorithm, and it's a little bit like Creative Commons, but it's kind of built right in. Total breach of privacy, but it tracks how much sharing we do, and the more sharing we do, the more we can borrow from others. You know, we're getting to a point where 200 years from now that really is possible. So, you know, it's you're creating a framework that institutionalizes the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. You can't just borrow other people's stuff and then, you know, sort of make it your own and then sue everybody else for if you're that kind of person and you're going to be so protective of your own stuff, then other people's stuff just won't be available to you. You can see people at Google thinking this way already. Moral rights. It's there. It's in the Berne Convention. It's non-commercial. And it honors the creative part of the process. It's not without problems because it's an injunctive remedy. You got to really shut someone down. Bunch of authorities and papers if you're doing research in the area. If you're not, don't worry about it. Oop. Can I mod yet? I think my answer is finally for the first year, probably. And next week, my probably is within the frame of reference of copyright law. Next week, we will rip apart everything and transform your mind by looking at the restrictions that contract law places on this stuff, and then trying to figure out how that balance should really work. Let me introduce the amazing Ian Verschere. Ian
Hello.
Will tell you a little bit more about himself, but he is the Chief Creative Officer of Roadhouse Interactive. He was at EA for a long time. He was a lot of places. He is a Vancouverite, and he is without a doubt one of the people who built the video game industry in Vancouver. In a very real way, and for a very long time. This is his third talk to this class, and I think this is the first time that, and it's serendipitous because I don't always require that we're thematic in our classes, but Ian's material and what he talks about as a creator couldn't fit better at the back end of a mod class if we tried. So without further ado, certainly one of my favorite people and one of my favorite speakers for the course. There's only a few that you'll see who've been here every year. Ian is one of them.
Oh boy, I'll try not to screw up. Thanks. Welcome. Thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak. You can go through if you want. There's a couple. When I click on this, you agree to that, so go ahead, just next slide. Thank you. So I just want to start with a couple, just some quick QAs. First of all, who plays games? You all play games? Okay, good. What consoles do you own? Wii? Okay. PS4? Xbox One? 3? Okay. So you, console owners in general, or what? Okay, quick question. What was the last game you actually finished?
Final Fantasy 13.
All the way through? Right to, like, credits? Awesome. How about you?
Kingdom Hearts 4.5.
Nice.
Diablo 2 was the last game I actually finished.
Yeah. It's just kind of, when you think about it, it's like amazing how few games you actually get right to the end. You play a lot of games, but it's like, wow. And you can't imagine doing that with a movie or a TV show. It's like, well, I'm 20 minutes in. It's like, yeah, look a squirrel. And you go, right? Like, it's like, games are like that. It's really, and people say, oh, you got to play for 60 hours. And the weird sort of equations that people make are like, well, if a movie is $12.50 for it's an hour and 40 minutes, then I should be getting, and they do the math, right? I can't think of another medium where you're sort of like, the metrics are sort of, the way you're quantified is so bizarre. Have any of you ever spent money in a free-to-play game? Actually done IAP in that purchase? Yeah, let's research, right? Have you? Do you mind if I ask what game?
Hearthstone.
Any other games besides Hearthstone, or Clash of Clans, or Heyday, or Boom Beach? Because now you're in my realm now, right? Which is so. Over the last 3 years, our business has really pivoted, and we've had to pivot hard. And I'll explain. I'll show you some demographics. I might even just skip the chart, because what's interesting is that the console market, the PC, the game market, everyone's talking about, so it's the end, or there's another crash coming. The console market has been doing this for a long, long, long period of time. So just a quick statistic, 160 million next-gen consoles were sold over the last 8 years. So Gen 3, Gen 4. Last year, to 2013, and I expect 2014 to be better, there are 200 million tablets. So we started our company in December of 2009, and in January, the iPad was announced. And we were making web-based MMOs. We were pivoting away from console. We're looking at, democratizing content, all this stuff. Oh, look, iPad. And so we just went, holy, let's go. So we've embraced mobile, and it's done very well for us. So, but it's curious that of this group, only one person will actually admit, Candy Crush, I bought a hammer. But it's only one person of this group will acknowledge having spent money on IAP, right? So our business now is pivoted really heavily towards analytics, business intelligence. We spend a lot of money on telemetry. Our games are reporting back to us. So in the old days where I would build a console title, and I'll talk about some of those very quickly as I go through, I'm kind of trying to spread out the pain of an introduction over a period of time.
And I'm just moving you over slightly so that you're in the center of the camera.
There's a camera. No?
You're perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I was watching like the Paper Chase. That's a TV show about lawyers, probably way before your time.
It's a movie before it was a TV show.
Okay. So that's what I asked. Does anyone know what ARPMAU means? Do you know what a KPI is? K-factor? Organics? Do you know what is KPI? Good. And ARPMAU is one of those, right? Average revenue per monthly active user. So I went to Emily Carr, and now I'm like looking at spreadsheets and graphs, and it's like, because it's really incredible, because we have one person who's paid and everyone's played. So let's assume we look at a conversion rate. We're giving our games away for free. So you talk about piracy, you talk about copyright and all this stuff. We just said, you know what? Instead of getting, printed on discs, sold in flea markets, pirated, downloaded, what's the best way to get around piracy? Give your stuff away. Take away the whole economy of piracy, and then look for other ways to make money. So in that case, I actually find it the most exciting time in the video game industry. In the 25 or 30 or however long I've been in this business. I've learned more in the last 5 years than I have in the previous 15. It's incredible. So you can lament and go to the government and try and create laws to block stuff, or you can just get on with your business and come up with a business model that goes around all that stuff. And that's kind of what we do. I don't mean that flippantly, but that's quite literally what we've done. Here's the game for free, all right? Sure, we get hacked. In fact, the Red Bull game I launched last week, we're getting 6,000 DNS attacks per second, right? So it's like, all right, let's go. And you know it's coming, and they're trying to get the free gold, and they're trying to get all the stuff, but you're prepared for that. And what you're really doing now is you're taking this value proposition, which is here's a free game, right? If you like it, if it's good enough, then eventually we hope after a period of time, and there's some friction points, and we might hit you up. Why did you monetize on Hearthstone? What was the moment?
Oh, well, they had released this single player
Sure.
campaign thing, and there's lots of cool cards you can access if you beat the single player campaign. And I was having a lot of fun just playing the game online. And I could save up a lot of in-game golds and get this, or I could just
Or you could just buy it, right? So, I mean, the way it works now is you look at skill, you look at time, and you look at money. And you assume that people have some various combination of those three things. So we provide a game that, yeah, sure, you can get all the way through it if you're really good, right? If you're busy, give me some money, and I'll create or reduce the friction, or the grind as we call it, right? And if you have money, you can just go bing, 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 buy, buy, buy. So time, skill, and money, those are sort of the three things. So you have to provide these three kinds of paths. So John, can you tap the... Well, I kind of got rolling. One of the things I've done is talk about current events. It feels like that's sort of this is what I'm going to cover. I'll share some IP war stories, one which I can no longer tell for legal reasons, interestingly enough. I want to go through the literacy and the idea of games as domain and why I think it's really important that you guys are here, doing what you're doing and taking actually, specialized things. Because again, like 20 years ago, parents are like, oh, he's going to be a lawyer, or she's going to be a lawyer. Right? And but it's a video game lawyer. Like you can imagine that conversation. It's like, so I'm going to join the circus. I want to be a rodeo clown. That's kind of where it was back then, right? And I'll share you a very specific case study of me going through that very pain. I have a stretch goal topic. You know what a stretch goal is? Those Kickstarter people. If we get to here before I have to run back, then I'll talk about this. All right? And then there'll be some of your QAs because I already started with the Q&A. That's our company. 102. It was, at one point, that's me. You can hear if you tap the screen one more time. That's me there. And that, me and him, and where's Tarny? No, that's Luke. Where's Tarny? Anyway, there's three of us at one point, and now we're 102 people. And we did not set out to do this, right? But this is the thing. We put, there's Tarny. So we put together a pretty darn good team of people, and we've slowly grown. And we've been resisting, like, give us higher. We've been very, very careful. I've been down the road. I've started a developer that grew to 300 and then had to shrink. And it's an interesting comparison. It's part of our DNA where you look at the way films and other media are made. Games are like this weird thing where it feels like the studio model is an odd one because you hire people and then, there's full-time employees and everything. And then if a game is canceled or it's like, oh, there's layoffs, it's, the sky's falling. Whereas in film, you have producers and a core group of really good people, like we do, and you use skilled people, right? After the script is done and pre-production's done, you have first day of principal photography, and that is when you start tearing up $1,000 bills, and you do that for a very fixed period of time, right? And then you have a wrap party, and everyone goes, that was awesome, and they all go their separate ways. And then you have a small group of people at the end of the project, right? But in the games, we finish the game. It's like, uh-oh, now what? So we're trying to find a flexible way to keep and create. We have 102 full-time employees. They're all top-of-the-line people, but we're also working on having scalability. Bringing in, I'll be heading back to China pretty soon to go visit a studio I've worked with there for a very, very long period of time. So that we're sort of a hybrid model of contractors, outsourcing, skilled, pulling in the people that we need, as opposed to just sort of bloating up to a 300-person development studio. Right? Does that make sense? Any questions so far? These are some of the games I did. Some are really good. I'm going to circle back to this one. That was my first lesson in IP. These are the old days. I've also worked with some really big brands, and I would add Red Bull to that pile. Go ahead. I just want to skip through this. It's kind of boring. Hopefully there's sound. Can you just... Oh, I wonder if the HDMI has sound. Well, so this is a couple. I'm just going to show you some of the more recent titles that we've worked on. This is, any of you familiar with Games Workshop and the Warhammer 40,000 universe? So this is Warhammer Carnage for iOS and Android. Game looks great. This is us bringing our sort of traditional game production values from, Chinese XGM of Relic, a lot of us from XDA, Ubisoft and stuff, bringing the sort of touch, swipe, gestural command and the free-to-play game mechanics to iOS and Android. That game, #1 RPG in several countries at launch, doing quite well, and we're going to move it to the free-to-play business model pretty soon here. It was a premium game, special edition, and now we're going to open it up. This is the reason why I'm sort of like, not this game, this one is the reason. I've got a bit of a tiger by the tail right now. Yeah.
This is an awesome game, by the way.
Yeah, I'm really. I'm super proud of the work we've done on this, and this is a partner not a license, a partner that I've been really looking forward to working with for a long time. It's been an interesting courtship, but we are really, really like Red Bull. They are an amazing company. They're the coolest people I've ever met. And no, you don't like wingsuit into the boardroom and like, yeah, and slam up. Their headquarters is in Austria and like they're Salzburg. It's really good people. Super great brand to work with. This is my first sort of #1 hit game on mobile. It's an original IP. So my old sponsors from my ski racing days are in the game. This was just basically a tap racer. So it was like, if you think of Guitar Hero or some of those games where stuff's coming at you and you tap in time, instead of tipping and turning, which I found really disoriented, you tap on the red line and release, tap, tap, tap. So this game did really well. In fact, we had 1.5 million downloads over the Sochi Olympics. And it was #1 racing game and sports game on iOS and Android around the world for all through the first quarter of this year. So I've got top and tail, first quarter and fourth quarter, the 2 racing sports games I did both hit #1. So so Red Bull, we're going to release a press release in the next day or so, but we hit 3 million downloads over the weekend. So when I say I have a tiger by the tail, that's what I'm talking about. So anyone know who Anita Sarkeesian is? Have you been following this? Yeah, I started off with Reddit and 4chan and stuff. We don't need to go into this if it's something you've already talked about. But
no, we need to talk about it. Go for it. Your perspective would be
super.
Huge.
I find it super, like, it really pisses me off, to be frank. I mean, our organization our hiring policy is hire the best person for the job. And wouldn't you know it, we just have this incredibly diverse group of people in our studio. You'd think, right? And just because we just said we need the best person for this role. We didn't go, we have to target our games towards women, or we need to hire, demographic A or something like that. We just said, get the best person. By following that process, we have this amazing studio. So when stuff like this happens, disclosing my vested self-interest in this is I would hate for some girl or someone from a visible minority or someone with a disability or somebody who has other challenges who loves games to go, that audience, man, they are a bunch of haters. I don't want to go into that career. That would just kill me, because the next Mario game or the next great game that I want to play might be in the head of somebody who sees themselves in Anita Sarkeesian and says, I'm not going there because of the hate. These people are being threatened with death, rape, chased out of their homes, right? And the irony of this whole 4chan Reddit cesspool is that these people are more than happy to expose all of the stuff about nude pictures and hack and all, but the minute you go after them to identify them, they hide behind the veil of privacy. So with respect to modding and all the other stuff, and I look at issues of intellectual property, and I talk about content, I think, DMCA at some point, you have to look at your own persona on the internet, whether it's an avatar, your real name, your character, whatever it is you do, as having certain rights to privacy and copyright. I think it's getting progressively much more personal. So I think the idea was I'd tap past this. Yeah, okay, one more, please. And then this. Did you know about this? So,
yes.
Yeah, it just like table flipping, right? Here's Emma Watson, right, speaking out about feminism, and her reward for doing that was threats on 4chan that they would post nude pictures. And what does 4chan do? Hides behind DCMA. So they've just embraced this now.
And the other piece, I don't know if you saw it. Was it the Daily Mail? Tell us about it.
Yeah.
You trace the origin of people that know things, and apparently the person behind it is a viral marketing advertising company that posted smoking on a whole bunch of fake Twitter accounts.
Yeah.
We're going to release it. So we're not sure if it's 4chan or if it's a viral marketing company that's behind this. So
If you're defending 4chan, I would love to hear I'd love to hear that case. I want to be there for that. Yeah. Yeah.
And then the other thing in sort of the amusing but not really category is, of course, I think it was the Daily Mail. I'm not sure. I stand to be corrected, and I apologize if I'm defaming them, and it was actually someone else. Did a review of Emma Watson's outfit when she did.
Well, don't get me started on that. It's just so ridiculous. It's just
like a serious fashion, written by their fashion columnists.
Right. The next one is a link, so we can just skip by it. I wasn't really going to go, but this go back up.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, just go up. Yeah, this one, the Reddit blog, where they talk about their sort of like reason for not closing the subreddit, which was the fappening. Yeah, the face palming. They see themselves not as a corporation or as an individual, but as a government. So if you want to read a really interesting blog, I highly recommend you read this thing. They say we are a government, not a community, not a corporation, not an individual or whatever, a government. So that's an interesting read. Okay, let's skip. That's all kind of grim and dim, and I'm happy to answer any questions about all that. Have you been following that sort of thing, right? It's really problematic. Gamers are, I think what it is a frisson between and our business is built around welcoming new gamers, right? And people who would traditionally not self-identify as gamers. Like 20 years ago, women, for example, 95% male activity. Now it's the other way. There's a majority. I mean, it depends on, of course, statistics can be, manipulated, but the majority of gamers now are over the age of 37, and it's like 60-40 women. That's if you roll in certain things. So now people who play like, hardcore deathmatch, like legal, are like, no, those aren't gamers, right? Popping candies is not gamers, but I don't care. You're playing a game. You're interacting with a computer, right? It's different. It's like you're talking about a taxonomy and a hierarchy that goes back to being a cinephile or being it's typical. It's nothing we haven't seen before in other media, I guess is my point. Now this is a fun piece of case law. Does anyone know what's going on here? Okay, great. This is really cool, and I want to sort of get back into the fun part. This is a photograph taken at a cosplay convention in Atlanta. Okay, it's at the Marriott Atlanta Hotel. This is last year. Most people dress up as characters, beloved characters. And you see some incredible. There's one out here, a fanfare or a cosplay con at UBC that was amazing. And the work and the passion and the dedication towards coming up with an obscure character, dressing up in costuming, and then going out and presenting yourself is phenomenal. So these guys, they commissioned a fabric that matched the pattern of the carpet in the hotel where the cosplay convention is held. So I love it, right? And everyone loved it, and it got on social media. It was like, here's like Final Fantasy characters walking around, right? There's Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, just the most obscure anime, manga, all that stuff walking around.
They modded the carpet.
They modded the carpet. So the company that made that wanted to make the fabric available to other people because they got a lot of requests. Guess what happened? They got a cease and desist order from the company that manufactures the carpet. So it's an interesting piece of law. And of course, it blew up on social media. It's a whole nother discussion around how you handle these kinds of things, right? Occasionally, an infringement actually could work to your benefit. If you have a smart community manager and you have a handle on how social media works, and you don't butthurt people who are doing some cool stuff for your brand. Obviously, you have to watch. I mean, the J.K. Rowling's one is really interesting. The minute she actually acknowledged using this guy's wiki, right, as a resource, because she can't keep the entire pantheon in her head. So, oh yeah, there's that Harry Potter wiki. Oh right, I forgot that character died here, right? So the guy was like, and there was this sort of general consent between J.K. Rowling's and this owner of the wiki. He then announced that he was going to go publish a catalog. And the full weight of the J.K. Rowling legal organization came down on him like a ton of bricks. And it was really quite tragic because there's scenes of him in the court, like, he just didn't understand that now you're commercializing her world, and that's the line that you do not cross. So I think that's John, would you say that's probably the most sort of like clear, that's as clear as that line could be, that's a good example of where that would cross? Yes,
and if you're interested in the J.K. Rowling's piece itself, the Harvard Copyright X course that's on the website. I've put the YouTube video on. It's either the first or second piece in it
Yeah.
is a panel discussion that included J.K. Rowling's lawyer and goes into this in some depth. But the pivot point is still commercialization.
Of course it is. And so there's a couple of interesting pieces of law that I'll leave it to you guys to look up because it's outside of my bailiwick. That's a law term, right? Okay.
It is.
There's one about Superman and Wonder Woman. So like to go to to do like I'm trying to remember the case, but the sort of
Detective Comics and B-Runs Publications,
Yeah, I made the note.
1940.
Should I stay in front of the camera or can you read that?
No, 111 F. 2nd 432. There is a copyright in Superman.
Yeah. But there's not a copyright on Herculean people. Otherwise, you couldn't have Thor, right? So it's an interesting sort of, you can't, these sort of like like the Superman is trademarkable, but not the idea of a Superman, right? So, nice. Nice transition. So that's an interesting, there's a couple other cases there, John, that I think are kind of relevant that I wanted to touch on. If you scroll down on this section, right? Yeah. The Singing Telegram. So there was Wonder Wench and Super Stud, where they offered, and they dressed not actually as they called themselves Super Stud and Wonder Wench, and they had a singing telegram business, and they were given a cease and desist order, and that one actually, the court ruled that yes, you're now in a costume that's meant to be something else, and you're commercializing, you're trying to, it doesn't meet with fair use. So that was, or parody, because it was a commercialization.
And the San Diego Chicken.
Yeah. Yeah. So that one actually, that was interesting. So the San Diego Chicken, any baseball fans here? I'm totally a baseball fan. It's like, this is the sad time of year where World Series are coming. I love it, and that's hockey. Like, oh, I wish I could play baseball all year round. But the San Diego Chicken, you know the famous chicken? Minor league ballpark fixation. And this guy dresses it. He was one of the original mascots. Made a shtick out of fighting Barney, the dinosaur. And so the creators said no, but they said, no, you know what? That's a recontextualization of Barney. It's a satire, and you're at a baseball game, and the San Diego Chicken has every right to beat up Barney in front of a crowd of people. So I leave it to
projection.
I leave it to these young minds to determine the nuances.
The judge was projecting.
Yeah, there are some really interesting.
Judge had children.
This is the world I dance around in all day, and so I'll try and create stuff, and I'll leave it to you guys to navigate. So go ahead. Thanks, John, for doing that for me. So my first brush with it was working with MTV back in 1994. So just, can you jump back and forth between this one and the next one? There's a significant, so this is the 8-bit Sega Genesis game we did. It was my first hit game. Did really well. Won Game of the Year. It's in the, you look at ROM emulators, there's a whole subculture around this game. We worked with Guar. It was a great experience. Awesome. But the difference between this one and this one was the first legal note I got, you have to take Metallica and AC/DC off of their shirts. Right? So if you go back up, in the TV show, that's fine, fair use. You're representing these characters, but this is an ancillary product based on the TV show. AC/DC and Metallica come off the shirts. So that was the very first kind of note I got. Maybe the law's changed. I think that the First Amendment is far more protective of video games now than they were back then, right? But that's easily because the domain, which I'll get to in a second, what constitutes a video game, is becoming more sort of ubiquitous. People have an understanding of it as a more mature media form versus a newer or a nascent sort of emerging form of media. So,
The law shouldn't be different.
but no, I agree. Okay, so video games are the end of civilization. So here we go. I'm just going to transition now to what domains are. This is like link between teen killers and video games. These guys were all big gamers. So correlation does not equal causation. They also, I think, were gun owners and maybe had other issues. So this is something that, I was actually called when I launched the Beavis and Butthead game by Tony Parsons on BCTV, the harbinger of bad taste. And my mom was like, yeah? And I'm like, I know. So, sorry, Mom. What are you doing? And I was like, it's this legacy of the pool halls, cigarette. Brand new phone. I dropped it. I was in line for an iPhone 6, and whoop, no, that's not quite what happened. So this is the kind of thing. So people are saying, oh, it's the end of civilization. So let's go through this fairly quickly. Do you know what this is? The very first, 1826, the very first photograph ever taken, right? And everyone said, it's the end of painting. We've killed painting because why would you paint something when you can just take a picture of it? Next one. your music is the end of civilization. And it's been that way all along. Now it's like, whatever. It's like, I mean, dubstep, man, maybe, or New Country, those are two lines I may not cross. but I mean, I don't see it that way. I'm still here. I'm still listening to really cool new stuff and everything. Next one, movies are the end of theater, right? That was the thing. So this is, go ahead, can you just this movie should be running, actually. So that's okay. Yeah. This is the Odessa Steps from Sergei Eisenstein. It's the first time where I think, and I use this as an example, it's not because he invented QuickTime. This is way after or before QuickTime. This film was the first time, or the argument can be made that this was the first time when film sort of transitioned from a means of documenting or recording, moving pictures, the novelty of moving pictures, to an art form. And what Eisenstein did was, once he exposed the film, and again, this is like him thinking in advance to set all these shots up, if you consider what he was doing. He took razors and cut the film up, and then re-glued them all together. He created the idea of montage, cutting, and editing. So previously it was like, here's a Broadway play, record it. It's a moving picture of a Broadway play. But this is where cinema evolved. This is that sort of quantum leap now where people go, oh, this is an art form. I can tell stories in a different way. And I would argue that games, I've been arguing for this for a while, but I think games are waiting for that sort of, that moment where it'll blossom and won't be considered the sort of the pool hall. I feel we're there now because it's just sheer ubiquity. Everyone plays games now. But yeah, this was a terrifying. People were screaming and leaving the theaters. It was magic to them. How did you do this? But this is Eisenstein. Had camera setups. He recorded the one scene and then the other. He had it all in his head or all mapped out. And there's this and he was cutting them up and moving it all together. And it was just, he invented montage and that's him. That's the director cameo goes back a very long way. Yeah. So anyway, this is a very famous thing. So go ahead. It's been riffed on and saying, and of course now games are the end of video games, which I don't happen to see it that way. We're getting killed. So next one, please, John. Thank you. So let's talk about this quickly. I'll have to sort of speed up a little bit. I apologize for that. Probably won't hit my stretch goals. My point being that civilization and culture, we've survived. We're here. It's great. There are still books. There's still paintings. There's still theater. Right? There's still console games. There's just another different thing. We're literate, more mature media. So it's the ability to, I'm defining literacy, and I'm quite happy for you guys to push back here. But it's the ability to read or write about something, to be a producer or consumer of text. And I use text in the semiotic sense, so I have to shout out to my Emily Carr background just a little bit. There are other forms of literacy if we expand our perception of text into other domains. You guys are literate in the domain of law. And so as technology evolves, you have to learn to be literate in new and emerging domains. So what I'm excited about here is that you guys are the domain of law and the domain of games. Like a lot of gamers here. So you have this kind of trans or cross-domain expertise, which I find shockingly comforting. So semiotics, that's symbols and signifiers that take on and convey meaning. The grammar of games, I use that word, I prefer that. It's much more accessible than semiotics. But these are the expectations, the rules, and the classic rules that good things are always found inside of other things, right? Shopkeepers are always heavily armed. It's like ninjas appear everywhere. There's all kinds of video game rules that are sort of things. So you're either literate in these symbols and signifiers or you're not. So can you just click on that? So this is one of these moments, right? Good things are always found inside of other things. There's a search for the Ocarina of Rhyme because there's Jay-Z and a bunch of hip-hop artists. Have anyone heard this? They've remixed all the Ocarina songs with hip-hop and stuff. It's really good. All right. So I ran into this domain early on. I was the first person outside of Nintendo to actually be able to animate and draw Mario. Singular honor. Thought, this is early days, radical. This is circa, 92 or something like that. A fun edutainment title. See, I'm just getting my point. There's two domains, right? Entertainment and education. That is aimed at educating kids ages 8 to 12 about the world's geography and history. A good game, right? Bowser has kidnapped Mario's brother. Or has kidnapped Mario? Anyway, he's in the fortress in Antarctica. You have to go around and statue of Prometheus at Rockefeller Center, cross on the Hill of Montreal. All these sort of geographical landmarks. Give them to Bowser to release his brother, and you're learning about geography on the way. Thought we had a hit on our hands. Yeah. how these words have haunted me. The video games are fun. This is not fun. It's like a school game. If this game had smoother control, okay, right. It did not have education in it. It would have been a lot better. Do not play this game. Right? It can only exist because Nintendo was forced by hordes of rampaging mothers of underachieving kids to make some game that would stimulate their brains or at least not rot them out. The mommies must have held Nintendo headquarters under siege for months for a game this horrible to have been produced. You're welcome. It was not a problem of literacy, but of domain. The gamers were visually literate and understood how games work. The problem was domain. The domains of games and education were completely incongruous at that period of time. Because now, game literacy is so pervasive, it's driving education initiatives. Right? You can see it. People are talking in corporate world. They're talking about gamification. Right?
It's driving democracy. I just gave him a quote earlier today.
Fair enough.
The uses of gamification in democratic structures.
Go Iceland. They actually wikied their constitution after the crash of 2008. Probably worth looking up. My favorite place to go. I go there all the time. If you've never been, highly recommend it. Game literacy can lead to success cross-domain, hence the intersection here of games and law, which I alluded to earlier. So, classroom obesity rates, now 1 in 3. You've seen, like Jawbone, Wii Fit, Fitbits, all these sort of things, Apple Health, all these sort of initiatives, right? They're basically gamified programs to get people off their ass. So, here's some stats. Very easy to blame games and screens as the enablers of a new sedentary childhood, right? I know my son has his friends over, and they're like, oh, there's probably like this media wall. We're going to drink Red Bull and stare at and I get outside. Here's a baseball mitt, right? And here's a bike, right? And if Steve Jobs actually, his kids did not have iPads. So anyway, it's easy to blame. I can see how people would, like Fox News, et cetera, would point at games as a cause, right? But now we're only now seeing teachers, parents, and others that's grown up with games. They see the cross-domain opportunities. So, yeah, here's a great one. This is Tanya. This is my favorite story. Tanya plays the French horn, right? That's not the coolest of instruments. I mean, the cello is kind of, they can see some Renaissance, hipster Renaissance coming back. And Tanya was fairly heavy and alienated in her school in phys ed. Those of you, I mean, probably are a lot you are fresher out of high school than I am. But, these cliques, jocks, nerds, goths, punks, there's a real sort of like taxonomy and cliquiness inherent in it. So it was leading to, I actually think it's one of the other reasons why, and this idea of safety and helicopter parenting, as much as video games and sedentary lifestyles or access to screens are causing the problem, that there's a withdrawal from physical education, performance anxiety, like, there's the captain of the football team, and I'm like, I'm a level 89 paladin. So it's a bit, there's some alienation going on there, right? So go ahead, John. Thank you. So does anyone know this? Have you ever been out to Metrotown or Aberdeen or whatever, right? Watch these two kids. I mean, are they even looking at the screen at one point? It's like, the guy on the left is, but the guy on the right is not. I mean, the Tabata protocol says 20 minutes of high-intensity interval training for 20 seconds followed by 10 seconds of rest. I mean, this is high-intensity interval training. Right? These guys are giving her. So, anyway, some PE teacher walking through the mall had a similar idea. So, he brought in DDR machines and started rewarding credit, physical education credit. Guess, okay, next screen, that's him actually being interviewed by like some news affiliate. Increased attendance, interest in physical activity, weight loss, and other health benefits otherwise marginalized from PE. So this is the elementary school teacher, or the principal, I guess. No, this is the PE teacher. The use of video games in PE is a departure from traditional PE. Students teaming up playing competitive sports. That method is catered to students who naturally gravitate to sports. So we're moving toward really trying to catch those kids who are non-traditional athletes. That makes sense to me. I don't know how you guys feel. Do you see where he's going with this? Okay. Tanya lost 40 kilograms. Oh, no, I didn't put up her pictures, her win pictures. Ooh. What happened? Oh, sorry, I have actually, oh, that's terrible. That slide got duped. That's my bad. I apologize, and I'll send you an update. And to be fair to Tanya, she lost 40 kilograms on the program. right? She looks like really good. I'm not talking about looks, but her health, right? It's amazing the transformation that she went through. The proposal was 1 hour of DDR burns more calories than jogging. The PE program would have had included 1 day of instruction in team sports, 2 days of activity, and 2 days of DDR tournaments. The superintendent halted it, calling it an idea whose time will never come. So even faced with a real-world case study, I'm so, but not having, it's not fair to Tanya.